Welcome to ARC Social Media's Business Boost, the radio show dedicated to celebrating business in Cumberland County. I'm your host, Holly Casey. I am a small business owner here in Amherst, and I've been involved in numerous conversations about our business community. And the overwhelming sense I get from the people I talk to is that there is a very strong collective desire to see our region grow and to see it thrive. There is also, it seems, significant concern as to how we're going to achieve that. So first, I'd like to stress that I know many individuals and groups in the government sector, the not-for-profit sector, the business sector, as well as regular citizens, employed and unemployed alike, who dedicate their time and energy to supporting business and creating business development opportunities in Cumberland County. My goal with this show is to encourage conversation that supports, enhances, and boosts the efforts of those folks. So, welcome to my show, and welcome to this, the very first episode. To help me kick things off, I thought it would be great to invite a special guest to join me. Someone with whom the community is well acquainted, someone who has dedicated decades of his life to serving and representing the region, someone who grew up here and was himself a small business owner for most of his life, someone who just happens to be my dad. Bill, welcome to the show.
Welcome
to
Holly.
Business Boost. Bill Casey.
Pleasure to be here. And I think this is a very worthwhile endeavor you're doing, and I hope it's successful in starting a debate and discussions. There are a lot of groups in Cumberland County that work diligently and faithfully with lots of volunteers to try to help enhance the economy and standards in Cumberland County. But perhaps a show like this can bring some of them together, and we can add a little value to it.
Well, I know that when I started to post about this on ARC Social Media's Facebook page, I've made a couple of videos, I've written a couple of things, and there's been quite a bit of response, both on the page itself, but also in direct private messages from other business owners and just citizens. And a lot of people are very concerned. Some of it does come out as negative, but I know it's just because they're frustrated because they know that, like, the community says they support them, but for some reason they're not feeling supported. And I really, really, truly believe that it's because we're lacking some sort of a webbing. And I know that lots of people are working really hard. And again, I want to stress that this show is all about helping to create even more webbing to support them. So I'm excited about this.
Yeah, well, part of it is long-standing, and it's our geographic location.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was talking to somebody the other day who's in a small businessman in Amherst, and his representative is the representative for New Brunswick and Cumberland County.
Mm-hmm.
His representative is not for the province of Nova Scotia, and where we are somewhat between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia.
Mm-hmm.
And so we sometimes I feel that Cumberland County gets lost in the shuffle.
I think so.
And we here have to make sure we keep our voice loud and clear and persistent.
Mm-hmm. So when I first thought of this, I thought, how do we start to build a pride in our area, and how do we do that without just sort of replicating what people are already trying to do? And I thought, what if we explored our history? What if we start by exploring the history of business in Cumberland County and in Amherst itself? I mean, I certainly don't know. I know a little bit about the history in our family, but even that I only know a little bits and pieces. So maybe that would be a good place to start within our family. So you were born here.
I was born here.
Your father was a small businessman.
My father was born here. He was a small businessman. His father was a small businessman. My grandfather had a radio store, which you probably don't even know about.
I didn't know that. In fact, I was going to ask that.
Yeah, he had a radio and a music store on Main Street in Amherst.
Really?
Yeah. And then my father was a car dealer. He was a Simpson Sears representative first, then a car dealer, and then he expanded into other areas.
And your mother's father was a businessman.
My mother's father was the owner of Moss Jewelers, and that had been in the Moss family for several generations. So we've definitely come from a line of small business people, and my two brothers were both in small business, and that's all we know.
I just want to take a quick segue to Moss Jewelers for a second. It's now where the Art of Eating Deli is, and Jeff Bembridge bought that building a couple of years ago, I think, and he put on the awnings up on the second floor, he put Moss Building on the awnings, and I just thought that was really neat, and I love how much he respects and appreciates the heritage of our town, because he works really hard at trying to do that. In fact, we had an interesting conversation one day about how much he respects the old buildings, and I just think I'd like to throw out some kudos to Jeff and the work that he does.
Well, you know, one of our biggest assets is our history. We go way back. There was an indigenous community here 1,000 years ago, where Amherst is. And there was a different one at Amherst Head, at Amherst Point.
And they were Mi'kmaq?
And they were Mi'kmaq, and they came here because of the wildlife and because of the ability to catch fish in the rivers and geese and ducks. And then the Acadians came, and they established here in Amherst. And then the British came, and so we have a long, long history in Amherst. And I don't think we celebrate our history enough.
No, I agree.
We've got tremendous history going back into the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s that we could talk about. And that alone is the number one interest of tourists, is historical and cultural events and sites. Every tourist survey indicates that historic and cultural sites are the most important ones they want to see. And the Ivney report, which was done a few years ago, a very thorough report on the economy of Nova Scotia, said that tourism is going to be a cornerstone of rural Nova Scotia
tourism
economy.
And immigration, if I'm not mistaken.
I wanted to focus on tourism and connect it with our heritage of our area and the history of our area, because we have it and we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it enough. And hopefully that will come.
Is it the Heritage Trust? Is that the name of the group that's working on the armories and the...
There's actually, there's so many groups really struggling to try to capture our history now and work, but there's actually a new group formed to save the armories, to repurpose it. I'm sure it'll be saved, but it has to be repurposed and it has to be viable. But there's a group of volunteers doing that, and there's a group of volunteers for the Heritage Society. There's a group of volunteers called the Cumberland Business Connector, which connects businesses and helps people. But there's just, the town is very active. I think the town has become much more attractive in the last few years with the way they've decorated it and the seasonal decorations they use. And I mean, I just find it's a big improvement. And I
they've
think
hired some really good people on town staff that have done some really hard work.
No, I think it looks really good, but we have to fight this trend in Canada. There's the tremendous move to urban cities, and it's not just Nova Scotia, it's everywhere. And every rural community has to fight it, and we have to fight it here. And we have to fight it perhaps a little bit harder than some other places just because of this geographic situation where we find ourselves.
Well, and I know a lot of people like myself have left for many years, but we want to come back.
Yeah.
And I came home 3 years ago, I think now, and I'm very grateful to be back, and I love that
Is it only 3 years?
3.5. But I'm very grateful to be able to do what I'm loving doing and have a business here in Amherst that hopefully will thrive and is doing great right now. But I know that there are lots of people who would like to be able to come back and find things to do, and it's tough.
It is tough, but the whole world has changed as far as... Amherst was a huge manufacturing plant. We had a pant factory. We built washing machines here at Canadian Assembly. We built airplanes. We built train cars and train wheels. And we built fridges and stoves. And we built bridges. We built cars. We had a car factory here at one time. We had 3 dairies that were active at the time, big ones, the big employers. We had a couple of soft drink bottlers, Tennis beverages and Chapman's beverages and so on. But we built everything from light bulbs and light fixtures to gum and railway wheels. But all that manufacturing now has gone to other places, mostly offshore. And so we've lost the manufacturing edge that we had, although we still do have some really good manufacturers here.
What is our leading industry right now?
Our leading industry is a really good question, and I'd say we're a service industry now. Our service community provides service for the county and of Cumberland and Westmoreland. We also service the agricultural community. We still have quite a strong agricultural area in Cumberland County. We still are. Blueberries, in particular, are a major supplier of income. But we've lost an awful lot of our manufacturing edge. Like Robb Engineering was huge. They built bridges and structures all over. Rose and Curry's built buildings everywhere out of stone. All these, but that's all gone.
When did that start to drop away?
I'd say it started in the 30s and 40s, actually, but even in the 50s, I can remember lineups of aircraft in Amherst at the enamel heating plant waiting to be disassembled. We had an airport in Amherst, a big one, and we could land big bombers, and we did right after the Second World War, and they disassembled them here and recycled the parts for them. And I remember when Robb's was in its heyday. I remember the pant factory. I remember certainly the Canadian Assemblies, which manufactured washing machines and TVs. And there was a lot going on even when I was young in the 50s and 60s, but then after that, it really started to wind down.
But then what happened? Like, why did it wind down?
It wound down probably, I would say the single biggest reason is the cost of labor offshore is so much less.
Okay.
And people transferred production offshore.
So that's when the big factories started to grow overseas.
Yeah, I mean, we used to build televisions here. We had several television companies in Canada. I remember one was Spartan. It was a great television, but now we have none. There's none in Canada. They're all made offshore because of technology and because of cost of labor.
Mm-hmm. So what did you see happening at that time? So you would have been like how oldish? Like when you started to see the changes?
I would say I would probably be 20 when I started to understand what was happening. Saw it in the car business. I mean, the Canadian car manufacturers used to have almost 100% of the car market. Mm-hmm. Now it's not half because of offshore automobiles that have come in. They've improved the cars, for one thing, and they've had lower labor costs than Canadian manufacturers, and they've not been able to keep up to maintain their market share. I remember I was a General Motors dealer at one time, and if we dipped below 50% of the market, General Motors was very upset. And now, I'm not sure what it is, but it's a far cry from 50%.
Mm-hmm. So then, as that was going away, like, what did you see happening to the town? Was it visible to you? Could you tell? Did the town start to decline in a visible way? Like,
it was evolutionary and a slow change. So it didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't sudden. I don't think any of us realized the evolutionary aspect of it, and that is offshore competition, but this tremendous move to urbanization. And again, it's all across the country. It's not just Nova Scotia, it's not just Cumberland County. There's a tremendous move to urban areas, and we have to find ways to offset that. Like, our population has declined, and actually the whole population of Nova Scotia declined year after year after year until last year. It increased last year for the first time, and that's through immigration. And several of the innovative immigration projects. We have an immigration project in Nova Scotia, plus the province took a real big interest in immigration, and the people took a big interest in immigration. And it started with the Syrian refugees, where we brought 250,000, I think it was.
I was just going to ask how many we brought into Nova Scotia.
Not 250, it was 25,000. And we brought to Canada, but a lot of them located in Cumberland County, in rural parts of Cumberland County. And the only way that was able to happen was people in the communities got together and created welcoming communities and reached out to them and provided money and housing and training and jobs.
Do you have any idea how many came to Cumberland County?
I don't have a number, but most of the ones that came here have stayed, and it's because of the community contribution. It's a scary thought to go to a new country.
I can't even imagine.
With a new religion, new customs, new dress,
new language,
new education. Everything's new.
Everything new, plus coming from a really traumatic existence before that.
Most of them were in refugee camps, and I mean, that's just an experience like we can't even imagine.
And kids?
Kids, yeah. So, I mean, it's a tumultuous change for people, but because of the community input, and we surprised ourselves. We really did. I mean, communities surprised themselves at how good they were at this. At places that never had an immigrant period have now got immigrant families in Cumberland County, and they love it. Yeah. And the people that sponsored it surprised themselves at how good they were at it. But I think it's our nature too. I think we're a friendly and generous nature, and this was a perfect example of how it could manifest itself.
With new projects, a new energy, and new ideas, new passions.
So certainly, it's funny, we have unemployed, but on the other hand, employers can't get employees.
What is with that? People say that all the time.
And they do. One of the biggest jobs is lack of employees that are appropriate for the jobs, and that's where immigration is coming in. Like I just read yesterday, Oxford Frozen Food is bringing families in.
Oxford has been a huge supporter of newcomers.
They're an extraordinary company.
Yeah.
They provide all kinds of things for their employees that no other company that I know of offer. But they're bringing families from Vietnam and South Korea.
Oh, wow.
That's a big deal because there's not a South Korean population here for them to be part of. And the same thing with the Vietnamese. There's not a Vietnamese community. So those people, I know, are going to face big challenges, but Oxford Frozen Foods and the community of Oxford has done this before, with Syrians especially, and they know how to handle it. So hopefully they'll be able to find ways to make them feel welcome and blend in with the community.
But what about all the people who are here? And why is there such a disconnect? There has to be jobs for people who, you know, maybe aren't trained in the areas that you're, like, of the jobs you're talking about. Like, what do you think is the disconnect? I was talking to a small business owner just the other day, and she says she